2 years or so ago. Time flies when you're having the most fun. And there are about 24 members. Membership fluctuates, but of professionals from all different types of roles in the criminal justice system. I've had the great fortune to be involved in that and to see the diligent and intentional work that each member of that committee has done to revise the code, to bring it into, to make it reflect reality now, and not the 70s or the 80s, or even the 90s when politics and crime was very different. Now though, we have that committee set to wrap up their work in a few months, and they will be introducing their work as an omnibus bill, hopefully, if not, then piece by piece, to go through the legislature. And in contrast to that, we still have our legislators introducing criminal justice-based bills. You can see in the report, in the addendum, and in the newspaper, if you would care to stay up to date that way. And all of those bills are done without review or consultation with the recodification committee. Which is why my office is urging legislators to wait for the recod bill to come through. Wait to introduce your criminal justice issue, or consult with the committee, because it's possible that the issue that your constituents care about has been addressed or will be addressed in the committee. When I was growing up, my parents told me that patience was a virtue, and I'm working on being virtuous. I'd ask that the legislators practice that patience to honor the greater good. Our state will benefit from a streamlined, effective criminal code, not one that is piecemeal together, as we have now, and not one that starts as streamlined and then is immediately attacked with line-by-line alterations. Though there are many advocates and constituents across the state who want more criminal justice bills, and though there is time to do it, I'll repeat my urgency for the legislators to wait and to instead heed the studies and science that we have now in 2017, which tells us that there are ways to decrease crime. There are ways to decrease addiction, and there are ways to decrease the prison population. And most of those start with investment in children, investment in the education system, and investment in our people as a whole. All of those issues can be addressed in bills, can be addressed in conversations with constituents, and can be addressed outside of the recodification effort. Crime affects all of us, including us defense attorneys. Ohio is not unique in that regard. We are, though, unique to some extent in our approach to how we address crime, punishment, and rehabilitation. As our criminal code grows in pages, so does our prison population. And as I mentioned, we are at the great fortune to have access to data, research, wonderful education institutions in our state, and best practices that are working in other places in other states. I, again, urge our legislators to heed the work of the Recodification Committee and to consider introducing bills to prevent future crime and addiction and to help their constituents, even their very youngest ones. Thank you.
morning. Unfortunately, they didn't teach one-legged public speaking at the law school that I went to, nor have I ever tried to do this before, so I guess we'll just learn together whether this is going to work. I too appreciate the Ohio ACLU in hosting this second forum to focus public attention on the public policies which contribute to an ongoing crisis that no one at the State House really wants to talk about, because it's kind of like the national debt. There's just no good alternatives. The report that you have focuses to a large amount on overcriminalization, the tendency of the legislature to make crimes for things that didn't used to be crimes, and they're certainly right about this, that is happening here and everywhere else. Our association views the criminal justice angles and prison overcrowding, though, a bit differently. Because there's only so many stretches of state highways and public spaces to dedicate, if legislators think it's a good idea to make it a crime to fail to register your agricultural scale with the Department of Agriculture, we do not feel we need to intrude upon their efforts to build a powerful political legacy. On the other hand, we reserve our fire for the more serious intrusions, which we believe are the enactment of mandatory prison terms for criminal offenses. And just so we're clear, a mandatory prison term means that an offender convicted of an offense must be sent to prison. The sentencing judge has no discretion on this most important decision in the sentencing of criminal offenders. The discretion of the judge is limited to how long that prison term must be within the range that the legislature gives for that offense. This is truly State House to prison pipeline. Just as methane is to climate change, mandatory prison terms is to prison overcapacity. Now, I'm not here to lecture or sermonize about the inherent evils of mandatory prison terms. There always have been these terms, and there always will be. And their careful use furthers valid sentencing policy. They do have their place. Murder and rape, for example, carry mandatory prison terms, and should. The real problem, however, is where the legislature comes forward with a mandatory prison term as a political response to a perceived criminal justice problem, or what may be more accurately perceived as a public relations opportunity. The problem is quite often the public relations solution does not address, let alone fix, the criminal justice issue. And these proposed laws are easy to spot because, fortunately, the legislator who sponsors the bill usually cannot resist the temptation to name the law after some sympathetic victim associated with the case. This annoying trend, as far as I can remember, goes back to Megan's Law, which is how we now have 40,000 registered sex offenders in this state. And when they struck gold with Megan's Law, the stampede followed. And here comes Annie's Law, here comes Laura's Law, Marcy's Law, Judy's Law, and soon we will have a full sorority of victims enshrined in the Ohio Criminal Code. Now, there are two perfect examples of bills introduced into the 131st example which explain these dynamics. The first was House Bill 57, or is better known as Justin's Law. And Justin Black was a teenager who was ruthlessly murdered by two other teenagers. The two defendants, and this is important, were successfully prosecuted. One was sentenced to death and the other sentenced to life without parole. What was Justin's Law? It was a mandatory sentencing bill on steroids. It would have raised the minimum parole eligibility for aggravated murder by 5 years and expanded the options for parole eligibility for life prison terms from 20, 25, and 30 to 35, 45, and 55. Just about doubling the minimum parole eligibility under current law. And it would, to boot, added a new death penalty specification, a new type of death penalty reversing 35 years of Ohio death penalty jurisprudence. In other words, the range of penalties for aggravated murder under current law did not prejudice the prosecution of Justin Black's two killers in any way, shape, or form. And whereas we should be standing back and applauding the criminal justice system for successfully prosecuting and sentencing these offenders, instead we're using Justin's law as a pretext for overhauling life prison terms that have nothing to do with his case. What was the rationale for doing that, by the way? Well, according to the sponsor, it was because the parents of Justin Black were appalled by the possibility that if his killers had not been sentenced to death or received life without parole, there was a theoretical possibility that they could have been released after serving just 20 years. A theoretical possibility, completely speculative, and akin to the theoretical possibility of there being life on Mars. Justin's law was voted out of the House committee after a minor amendment, and it passed the House on a vote to 83 to 11, with a total of 32 co-sponsors.